Hello everybody, welcome once again to a continued lecture on Macflecknoe. If you remember, in the last lecture I had given you a brief introduction to the poem, its genesis, certain details about satire, and today we're going to talk about the poem in some detail. So let's first look at some of the aspects of Macflecknoe as a poem. The first thing is that this poem has been considered both a Juvenalian satire as well as a Menippean or Veronian satire. Juvenalian because it lampoons Shadwell with a lot of invective, raillery, wit and some amount of abuse. Menippean or Veronian because it also satirizes bad writing and literary pretensions. And as we discussed in our last lecture, a Menippean satire is one which satirizes not people so much as qualities. In addition to being a Juvenalian and Menippean satire, this poem is also regarded as a mock heroic poem. Now, this is the first time that we are coming across this term mock heroic in Macflecknoe. Let's take some time to look at what is a mock heroic. We all know that a heroic poem, or let us say epic poetry, is basically a long narrative that talks of the very heroic exploits of an individual in very sublime and very elevated language. A mock heroic, on the other hand, is a form of verse which uses the heroic manner to make a trivial subject seem grand in such a way as to satirize the style and also to make both the subject and the theme ridiculous. Something equivalent to breaking a butterfly on a wheel, so to say. Macflecknoe as a poem also uses irony, humor, parody, invective, exaggeration and wit as instruments of satire. In this poem, you will find multiple references to contemporary people, places and events which make the poem very topical. At the same time, there are numerous allusions to other works of literature, historical and biblical personages, which intensify the complexity of the poem, but at the same time, they can sometimes make it confusing or a little tedious for the reader. You, of course, needn't worry because we shall be going over all these aspects in greater detail in the course of this lecture. Now let us first talk about this poem as a satire, since that is what it primarily is, a satire. Let us first discuss this poem as a satire, that's what it primarily is. And we see in this poem that Dryden shows consummate skill in his ridicule of Thomas Shadwell. He attacks Shadwell with all the weapons in his literary armory: irony, sarcasm, innuendo, raillery and sharp wit. In depicting Shadwell as the heir to the kingdom of nonsense, thus far ruled by the aging King Flecknoe, Dryden uses exaggeration. He also builds a narrative that places both Flecknoe and Shadwell in a metaphorical space occupied by the likes of Augustus Caesar and King David, and this makes Shadwell ridiculous and small by comparison. The qualities that make Shadwell fit to ascend the throne of this kingdom of nonsense are presented in a way as to satirize him. For example, Shadwell alone can wage immortal war with wit. He has been, once again I quote, mature in dullness from his tender years. He stands confirmed in full stupidity. He never deviates into sense. Dryden makes fun next of Shadwell's huge body. He is compared to huge trees, and I quote, thoughtless oaks that shade the plain. And this comparison is an indication that nothing can grow under such a tree. Shadwell is also depicted having a mountain belly, that is a huge stomach, basically loads of fat on him. But this huge, within quotes, ton of man possesses only a, within quotes, kilderkin of wit, meaning to say that he may look huge, but in this huge body there exists only a tiny fragment of wit. Shadwell's musical pretensions are also ridiculed by Dryden. Now, Shadwell considered himself to be a great musician, along with, of course, a great playwright and an opera writer. Now, how does Dryden ridicule Shadwell's musical talent? Dryden compares Shadwell to the legendary Greek musician Arion, who played the harp so beautifully that when he played, dolphins would flock to his boat. Conversely, when Shadwell plays, only tiny little dirty fish throng towards his boat, like they would at any bit of sewage that would be floating on the River Thames. Shadwell was a prolific writer. He wrote numerous plays and operas, usually one after the other, one every year. Now, Dryden ridicules this talent in two ways. The first thing he says is that Shadwell has absolutely no sense of rhyme, of rhythm, or of meter. Therefore, his operas are no good. The other thing that he says is, no matter how many plays Shadwell writes, he will still remain the mediocre writer that he is. No amount of practice is going to improve his skills. And he sums up Shadwell's lack of literary talent in the following couplet. I quote, "All arguments, but most his plays persuade, that for anointed dullness he was made." Dryden's wit becomes sharper and more pungent when the coronation of Shadwell takes place. Let's see how this is done. Right, so Dryden's wit becomes sharper and more pungent when the coronation of Shadwell takes place. And let us see how he does this. The venue of the coronation is not some grand palace or mansion, but rather a building called Barbican, a ruined structure that stands outside the walls of London and which once upon a time was a magnificent palace, but today it is a nursery, or rather an acting school for fledgling actors. That is, it is a second-rate acting school. And along with being an acting school, it also functions as a brothel. The attendees at the coronation are the very scum of society. People from the low-grade, squalid, seedy areas of London. I quote from a couplet, "Roused by report of fame, the nations meet from near Bunhill and distant Watling Street." And notice Dryden's use of the word nations. It is a grand word. It feels like there are a lot, hundreds and thousands of people that are coming to witness Shadwell's coronation. But where are they coming from? From Bunhill and Watling Street, which were not really the very good areas of London. Now, the path to the throne is lined not by beautiful, exotic, expensive Persian carpets, but rather by scattered limbs of mangled poets, that is, torn pages from the volumes of mediocre writers, and more than any other, it is Shadwell's own works that line this path to the crown, to the throne. The guard of honor is led not by the traditional yeomen, but by bilked stationers led by Herringman, who was Shadwell's own publisher. These bilked stationers, including Herringman, are those publishers who have not yet been paid their dues by Shadwell, and they discover that this is the correct time to catch him. Now, as within quotes, lambent dullness plays around his face, Shadwell takes oath of office, and he is anointed as king by none other than his own father Flecknoe, as king by office and priest by trade. If you just go back into the previous lecture, remember that Flecknoe was a failed poet, a bad writer, and he was also a priest. So when he is made the king of the kingdom of nonsense, as king by office of the kingdom of nonsense, and as priest by his original trade, he is the person who anoints his own son Shadwell as he takes the throne. In his hands, during the time of coronation, Shadwell holds not the customary symbols of office, for example, the scepter and the globe, but rather he holds a mighty mug of potent ale in his one hand and Love's Kingdom, a book written by Flecknoe, in his other hand. In his oath, he swears that he shall never make peace with wit or truce with sense. That is, he is going to rage an immortal war against the greatest enemy of the kingdom of nonsense, which would be wit and sense. Now, as Shadwell is anointed the king, 12 owls are seen to fly over his head. Now, this particular incident is a parody of the myth that when Romulus, the founder of Rome, was being made king, 12 vultures were set to fly out into the sky, thereby establishing his authority. In the case of Shadwell, it's not 12 vultures, not symbols of bravery, but 12 owls, symbols of actually sleepiness. It is in the speech made by Shadwell's literary father, Flecknoe, that Dryden's satirical powers are at their peak. This speech, please note, is in the form of what we call an inverted blessing. That is, every single blessing that Flecknoe gives Shadwell is not so much a blessing as a curse. Flecknoe wishes, for example, that Shadwell's domain extends far and wide. And I quote, "From Ireland let him reign to far Barbados on the western main." Significant that between Ireland and Barbados there is nothing but the Atlantic Ocean. This means that Shadwell will essentially be reigning over emptiness. Flecknoe serves as the mouthpiece of Dryden, the poet, as he continues to describe and in the process inadvertently ridicule Shadwell's literary pretensions, the mediocrity of his plays and his operas, his forgettable characters, his audacity in thinking of himself as the literary successor of the great Elizabethan playwright Ben Jonson. While Ben Jonson was one of the greatest practitioners of the comedy of humours, Shadwell is so presumptuous as to invent new humours for each play. Jonson never plagiarized from other writers the way Shadwell borrows freely from his contemporaries, especially, as Dryden says, from George Etheridge. But Shadwell's purple passages always stand out. I quote, "So transfused as oil on waters flow, his always floats above, thine sinks below." Basically, when Shadwell plagiarizes from the works of George Etheridge, Etheridge's words float high above like they would as oil floats on waters, and Shadwell's own words simply sink to the bottom. Shadwell's genius, says Flecknoe, is suited not to the writing of great poetry, but only to the writing of harmless acrostics and anagrams. His tragedies smile and his comedies weep. That is to say, each of them gives out absolutely the contrary effect to what is desired. As the poem ends, sending the yet, within quotes, declaiming bard, that is Flecknoe, down into the underworld, the reader is left laughing. The laughter in Macflecknoe, please remember, it's not cruel. We do not scorn Shadwell. He becomes rather the object of our laughter. The terms of praise of Flecknoe for Shadwell deal with art, with religion, and with monarchy. The irony is that neither Flecknoe nor his son Shadwell are kings, artists, prophets, or poets. They are neither of these, yet they are praised for being all of these. And this is where the satire takes a peak. In satirizing Shadwell, Dryden is clearly and emphatically satirizing bad writing. Of course, he's also settling a personal score. Let us look now at some of the historical and literary allusions that abound in this poem. We start with the first person who's mentioned there, Augustus Caesar. All human beings are subject to decay, and when fate summons, monarchs must obey. This Flecknoe found, who, like Augustus, young was called to the throne and had governed long. Augustus Caesar and Flecknoe are compared to each other. Flecknoe, in being compared to the aging Augustus settling the question of succession, is satirized and ridiculed because while Augustus Caesar was the ruler of the Roman Empire and gave it its golden age, Flecknoe rules over the kingdom of nonsense. Let us look at other allusions. Heywood and Shirley, they were both lesser-known poets of the Elizabethan age, and they are made prototypes for Shadwell. John the Baptist, and this here is a biblical allusion, just as John the Baptist came to announce the arrival of the Messiah Christ, Macflecknoe will announce the arrival of Shadwell. Augusta, which is the ancient name for London, and using this name imparts a mock seriousness to the poem, which becomes satirical. Also the use of the word barbican, the use of archaic terms like height, etc. They give a sort of seriousness, a sublimity to the poem, which makes its content even more satirical. Ascanius, who was the son of Aeneas, and the Aeneas-Ascanius pair is contrasted with Macflecknoe and Shadwell, another father-son pair, heightening the mock epic effect. Hannibal, again the son of Hamilcar Barca, another father-son pair, Hannibal, Hamilcar, Ascanius, Aeneas. So this father-son pair, Hannibal and Hamilcar, again they are contrasted with Macflecknoe and Shadwell, as Hannibal swore to his father Hamilcar that he would always be an enemy to Rome. So Shadwell swears to Macflecknoe that he will always be an enemy of wit and sense. George Etheridge, successful playwright, he was Shadwell's contemporary, and Macflecknoe says that Shadwell borrowed extensively from Etheridge without acknowledging, of course. Cully, Cockwood, Fopling, Dorimant, Lovett, these are all well-known characters created by George Etheridge. Psyche, the misers, the hypocrite, the humorist, these are all names of operas and plays by Shadwell, and they feature extensively in the poem. Charles Sedley, poet and wit, who is alleged to have helped Shadwell with writing his plays. He features here. John Ogilby, who is interestingly called Uncle Ogilby in the poem. He was an inferior poet, a contemporary of Shadwell, from whom Shadwell should take inspiration, according to Dryden. Elijah and Elisha, again a biblical prophet, Elijah, and his disciple Elisha, another pair that are contrasted with Macflecknoe and Shadwell. Other than these references, there are numerous allusions to Milton's Paradise Lost, particularly in the coronation of Shadwell. There are references to the Bible, references to Roman history, to English history, etc., to English kings and monarchs, etc. Various polarities like light and dark, day and night, good and evil, father and son, wit and dullness, fat and thin, big, small, etc. are used to heighten the satire. The poem also uses some amount of scatological imagery, that is, images of sewage or defecation, etc., to ridicule Shadwell. In conclusion, one reads the poem not with indignation or even of moral disapproval of Shadwell, but rather with enjoyment of his superbly comic figure. Shadwell needn't be condemned. He shouldn't be condemned. He was certainly not the public nuisance that he is made out to be in the poem. The strength of this poem is Dryden's dispassionate use of Shadwell as material for satire and for comic creation. That will be all on Macflecknoe for today. I shall meet you in the continuing lecture on Dryden's Alexander's Feast and the Power of Music in my next lecture. Bye-bye. Thank you.